feel like we should have guitars.
You should, yeah. Thank you all for coming. This is wonderful. The book is officially on sale tomorrow.
Yes.
Congratulations. What number is this?
Well, I'm at the stage in my career where I've written so many books that they say it's the 12th Will Trent rather than this the 24th. That's
24.
a lot, yeah.
Has it been like one a year for?
Yeah, forever. Since I graduated middle school.
All right, so let's go back to the very beginning. When did you realize you wanted to become a writer, and what was your path?
Well, I mean, it's a difficult question because I always distinguish between being a writer and being a published author. And so I guess when I was 6 years old, I started writing these little books about my family. And I'm the youngest of 3 girls, so most of them were about my sisters being mutilated or murdered or disappearing or being kidnapped. And I was kind of like a cat. I wanted to be an only child, right? Like cats always want to be the only cat. And they really didn't have a narrative arc. They were just mostly the happy ending was I was an only child. And my dad really loved these, and he paid me for them. So he would give me a quarter every time I wrote one. My sisters were my worst critics. Fortunately, they didn't matter. And I still continued to publish well into the 1st grade. So does that answer your question?
I mean, that's certainly a good beginning. So you were killing off your sisters all
Yes.
the goddamn time.
Yes.
And sooner or later you developed other plots.
Yes.
When did that start happening?
Well, you know, I think every writer I know has a teacher who really touched them. Not that way. And I had a 9th grade English teacher I just worshipped. And now she would be fired because we were all terrified of her and parents would complain. But, you know, I'm Gen X, so my parents were like, well, people are just not going to like you. Get used to it. And she was the first person who told me, you're a good writer, but you could be better. And I had never thought about writing as a craft that you could hone and you could use language in a way that expressed a thought without being really overt about it, you know, because she was, of course, making us read Shakespeare, and we, as 9th graders, had no idea what it was really about. And she gave me that insight into what it was really about. And I love that. You know, being the youngest of 3 girls, I always had horrible stories about my sisters that I slowly fed out. You know, whenever I got in trouble, it was like, well, did you know that this boy stayed over when she was supposed to be babysitting me? You know, that was like, so I loved having this secret language and the idea of that. And she gave me the books that were the most important books of my life at the time, like Flannery O'Connor, or, you know, just showing me all the ways that you could use language.
So is that 9th grade, is that when you thought this is something that I want to do?
It was, but you know, I was very conscious of the fact that no one can make a living being a writer, right? We're really lucky that we're in this position where we can support ourselves being a writer, and I'm grateful for that every day. And so I always had a backup plan, especially because when I graduated high school, my dad said, you can do anything you want with your life, you just can't live at home. And so I did all these different jobs while I was writing. I went to college, I dropped out, so if you're gonna drop out, write a New York Times bestseller. But I painted houses, I was an exterminator. That was a drug front, but that's a different story. I owned a sign company, and every time I had any time, I would write. I would get up in the morning and write, I would come home from work and write, I would take the weekends and write, and just had these very sharp bursts of creativity because I wanted to be a published writer. That was my goal, is to be able to call myself an author. And I was actually running a pretty successful sign business, doing point of purchase, signage, banners, all that kind of thing for companies. And I thought, gosh, my goal is to be a writer, not own a sign company. And at that moment, I thought 30 was really old. And so I said, I can't be 30 and not have a book published because my life will be over. Like, everybody dies at 32. And so I was 26, and I said, this is going to be my goal. I sold my business. I used every free moment I had to write and become a better writer and work on, being a writer, because the hardest thing about being a writer is sitting down and writing. And I got my first book deal when I was 29.
Wow. Yes, definitely. So all throughout your 20s, when you're laundering money in the exterminating business?
No, just being the front so they could sell it. I would not launder.
You're writing, are you writing short stories? Are you writing essays? Are you writing novels and not getting to the end? Are you getting to the end?
Well, I would write short stories, and then I thought, well, I've got more stories, so this is a novella. And then, I still do that. Do you do that when you're like, well, it's not going to be a short story, thank God?
I've never written a short story in my
life. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Really? No, I always get to this point in a book when I think, okay, is there enough story for this to be a book? I just was writing longer and longer and longer, because it takes a lot of discipline to be able to do that, and just learning the habits of doing it. That's a big part of it, I think. We're not all like sitting in coffee shops, thinking deep thoughts. We're sitting down and actually pounding out and figuring out how plots work. And particularly when you're writing a thriller, there's so many balls you have to juggle, and it's a very complicated way of plotting. So I was figuring out how to be a writer, and fortunately it worked out.
So that book that you sold when you were 29, was that the first novel you'd finished?
It wasn't. So I got my agent with this book that I wrote that was basically, I'm from the South, I'm from Georgia, so I thought I had to write this great Southern novel. And I got an agent with it, she sent it out, and no one wanted to publish it, which was shocking. And I said, could you send me the rejection letters? I want to know what they have to say. And she was very worried, because she thought I'd write them all nasty letters or something. And
so this was pre-email, right?
Pre-email, yeah. So she redacted, but not really well. So I wrote them the letters. No, I didn't. I thought, well, this is an opportunity to get feedback from all these editors in New York, because at the time there were a lot of publishing houses. Now there's 2. But I read what they said, and basically it was, we love your writing, but not this story. And so I talked to my agent, and she said something that is a gift to every writer. She said, what do you want to do next? Because I thought, well, I've lost my agent. But she wanted me to do another book. And I said, I always wanted to write a thriller, but I don't know if I can do it. And she said, try to do it. See if you can do it, and then send it to me. And I had saved up all this time, because at that point I was working for someone else. And I had 17 days I could take off, because Christmas and the holidays and all that added into all the sick days I ever took, and that sort of thing. And so in 17 days, I wrote The Bones of Blindsided, my first novel. And then I sent it to my agent, and it took her 6 months to read it. And she called me up, and she said, okay, this is fantastic. I think I can get you a book deal. And I said, well, I need a 2-book deal, because you took so long to read it, I wrote the sequel. And that was my second book, Kiss Cut. And then, so she said, okay, send it to me, I'll read it. And then she only took 3 months, right, the next time. And she said, I really think I can get you a 2-book deal. And I said, I need a 3-book deal. And she said, please stop writing. And she got me a 3-book deal. But, all of this took a lot of time, and it sounds really, in retrospect, but I got many sleepless nights, and I felt like Charlie Brown going to the mailbox looking for the Valentine from the Little Redheaded Girl. But it just, gosh, it was when you had to pay for minutes on your phone, on your cell phone, and I was out on a job, and I didn't want the minutes on my phone. And I saw her calling, and so I went to a phone booth and called her, and she told me that she'd gotten this great offer, but she turned it down because she thought she could get more, and I was like, bleh, bleh, bleh. And she did, so it worked out.
That first book, the one that didn't sell, did you ever revisit it?
Yes and no. Like, I've thought about it, and I've thought about how I could turn it into a better book, but I'm more of a move forward instead of a go back person. I think, like, people are very distinctly one or the other. Like, if I gave you a time machine, would you go back to, Henry's court? Don't marry him. Or would you go to, into the future? And I'm definitely a future person. You're probably more of a, let's see what history was really like person.
No.
No?
No. So that first book that you sold was a thriller. You said you'd wanted to write a thriller. Did you know at the time that you were launching a career that you would be in forever? I mean, forever, I guess, is yet to be seen. But for a long
Thank
time.
you. Thank you. It's like, what do you know? Why? Weirdly, I did. I just thought it was going to work out. And that's not because I believed in myself. It's because I was 29. I was stupid, It's like, and I remember having this conversation with my dad, like, oh, maybe I should quit my job. And he's like, no. And I did. I kept my job. Like, I remember my first check came for they give you money when you sign the contract. And I had like 30 minutes for lunch, so I went through the drive-in, and I was in like my VW Bug, and I gave it into the drive-in, and the woman said, honey, you're going to have to come inside. And I was so annoyed because it was my whole lunch half hour. And I was like, and I'm sure they thought that I had stolen it or something was going on. I mean, they knew about the drug stuff, but that was something different.
By the way, I think it's maybe too late to tell you that we're being recorded.
It's statute of limitations, baby.
Who were the big thriller writers at the time?
The ones I loved were Sue Grafton.
Mm-hmm.
I still adore Sarah Paretsky. And she's an amazing woman, and I mean, both of them were amazing, and Sue's given so much to female crime writers in particular, Sarah, to female crime writers in particular, but they weren't writing the kinds of books that I wanted to write, and there were very few women. I mean, I guess Patsy Cornwell was doing it, but I wouldn't say as unflinching as the kind of things that I wanted to write. Only men were doing that. Here and in the UK, there was a writer named Mo Hader, who unfortunately has passed away, who was writing that kind of hard-hitting stuff. And it was really tough at the beginning because I would go on interviews and a lot of men would say to me, male interviewers, well, why would you want to write this? Or why would you want to write like a man? Or they would describe my writing as muscular and all these...
Excuse me for interrupting. Why would you like to write that?
Why would you want to read that? So it was really hard. I got that question constantly, like, why are you writing about violence against women? And I'm like, well, I am a woman, and this is the sort of thing that we're subjected to. I mean, I've never met a woman, maybe you're in the audience and this has never happened to you, where you haven't felt at some point in your life really vulnerable because of something a man has done, wittingly or not, or you've been harassed, or I was on a school bus going to the museum with all my girlfriends, and we were 12 years old, and this guy just decided, hey, I'm going to flash a school bus full of young girls in the middle of Atlanta. So every woman I know has some kind of story like that, and so I wanted to write about those experiences and violence against women from a woman's point of view, because what I was seeing were two things that I knew were not true. And one of them is, when men were writing about this, predominantly, not all men, you would have this scenario where a woman was really damaged, and then she was either catatonic or she was riding a motorcycle and smoking cigarettes, right? And then the way she was healed was the hero of the book would make passionate love to her, right? And that's a great fantasy if you're a man writing these books, but it's not how it happens. Healing comes from within. And the other thing was I wanted to write about what violence feels like from a woman's perspective. And I think, honestly, it just scared the shit out of a lot of men to read from a woman's perspective what this is like. And that was really important to me because when I was growing up, my grandmother was being horribly abused by my grandfather. And we never talked about it. And we would see her with a black eye or a cut lip or a broken bone. And my big strapping uncles would tease her about being clumsy. And as I got older, I thought, she's not that clumsy. And I said to my sister, what's going on? And she said, we don't talk about it. And I know not talking about it never protected her. It only protected him. And so I thought, I think every crime writer, when you write a novel, you decide the tone of the novel, how much you're going to show, how much you're going to pull back from. And for me, I thought, I'm going to show this for what it is because it is horrible. There's no fade to black. I mean, I do, I'm not here to titillate. I'm not here to shock. I'm just here to show you that this isn't right and this is something that happens every second of the day in the world.
So you mentioned a couple of things that go into a book being a Karin Slaughter book. Did you have a vision when you were in your late 20s and starting this career, what a Karin Slaughter book was going to be, what the language was going to be like, the plot, the characters? Tell us.
I did. I really was very sure very early on, and I hate to do that write early thing of, ooh, I found my voice, but writing about crime really was something that felt very easy for me. And I'm a very opinionated writer. And I think that's part of the reason why I love writing is it's a way to explore different facets of these topics, about society, about community, about violence, about all these things that affect all of us in a way that puts it into fiction where it feels safe. And that was really important to me. And I knew that when I started writing about Sarah, that she would get older as I got older. I didn't realize we were going to get this old. But I've done a lot of horrible things to her, but I let her slow down in the aging process because I thought I'm just not going to be that mean. But I wanted them to change because that was something I noticed in books where a character would have something horrific happen to them, and then in the next book they were fine. And they were shocked again when another horrific thing happened, right? So I wanted to talk about how violence changes people and how fear changes people, and it can tear them apart or bring them together. And so that was really from the very beginning, I was clear that that was going to be my focus.
So Sarah was the first series you got into? Yes. And how many books are in that series?
6 in the Grant County series.
And how many in the Will Trent series?
12.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
And how do you... I've never written a series. I don't really understand how you do it. How do you make sure that you're not repeating too much from a previous book or not sharing enough background from previous stories, or that whole thing of how much do you need to tell the audience what has gone on before in each book?
It's a big decision, and I'm not as precious about it as I used to be. When in Grant County, I thought, well, everybody should just read everything, and you should. But then I think it just comes with the confidence of doing it more and trusting your reader and realizing, okay, well, if you want to know about this, then go back and read the book. But if you don't want to know about it, then just keep on going, right? And that takes a lot of discipline to be able to do that and say, I'm going to trust my reader and I'm going to find a new way to tell this story. And it's really important because like with This Is Why We Lied, it's a great way to start the series because I've taken Will and Sarah completely out of their element. So you really don't have to know anything about them. It stands alone. And I think that's really important when you're writing a series to make sure it does, because people read out of order or they start one and they don't realize there are 5 others, and I don't want them to feel like they're lost.
So 2 different series are now converged.
Correct.
When was their first convergence?
So when I wrote the 5th Grant County novel, I took a break and I wrote the first Will Trent novel. And that was very deliberate because when I wrote the 3rd Grant County novel, keep up if you know your math, I thought, I can't keep writing about this small town where horrible things happen. It can't be Cabot Cove. Like, why is anyone living there? There's rapists and murderers and pedophiles, and it's worse than Congress, right? So, I thought, I can't do this. I need to have a bigger palette. And so by the time I wrote the 5th book, I knew that Will Trent, who he would be, I knew Sarah would eventually come into his world. And so I had 2 books with him, and I had to get him in a position in his life where he had a history and a story, but then he became the kind of man that Sarah would be interested in.
That's great. And when did Hollywood come knocking?
They knocked a lot.
Yeah.
And, in the beginning, it's very flattering, and you're like all excited, and then they option something, and then it doesn't happen, and they option it again, it doesn't happen. And then they say, oh, well, this is in South Georgia. How about we put it in South Louisiana instead, or South Indiana, or, they want to just change everything. And so I kind of stopped answering the door after a while. And that's when it happened, is when I just said, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm not interested in it. And someone asked for a meeting about my book, Pieces of Her. And I thought, okay, well, this is Pieces of Her. It's just a standalone. And so let me see what she has to say. And I liked what they had to say. And then, it came out on Netflix. And then someone else said, hey, would you mind having dinner with me? I'm interested in Will Trent. And actually, she was interested in all the books. That this woman, Liz Heldens, she had read a lot of the Grant County. She loved Will Trent. She had really interesting questions about the characters. And I thought, wow, this is not just someone who wants the books because they're successful books. She really loves the characters. And I think when you watch the show, you can tell that. Like, they really want to capture the essence of who Will and Angie and Faith and Amanda are. And it's just really, it's wonderful when you meet someone who really loves your stuff. It turned out well.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
My literary agent advised me that I should limit my participation in the film and television business to depositing checks. What has your participation been?
Well, I'm an executive producer. I was on both shows. When Pieces of Her filmed, I was going to be on set more, but COVID happened. Uh-huh. And they moved. They were going to film in Vancouver, and then they moved to Australia, and you had to quarantine for 2 weeks in a hotel room. And I thought, well, one, I don't need to do this because, this is a pandemic and I shouldn't just be traveling because this looks like fun. But also, I was really worried I would end up smearing my feces on the wall if I was in a hotel room.
That's a very specific worry.
Yeah. Well, they actually, so I was talking to people who were there, and I talked to this one woman, and it was like, wow, she sounds like she's ready to jump out the window. And I said, how long have you been in this hotel room? Like, one room. And she said, 3 days. But a nurse called them every day to make sure they weren't doing something. But they literally could not leave the hotel room. So that limited my participation. With Will Trent, they'll talk to me about story. That I see the dailies. I talk to the cast. I'll have them. I'll be on the treadmill and get a text saying, what was Amanda's mother's name, and can you tell us a little bit about that? And so it's nice that they're including me. I see all the scripts. I've seen the first script for the first episode of the 3rd season. It's fantastic. Ramon is directing it, and he's doing a really fantastic job, so I'm really happy about that.
Do you give feedback?
I do. I gave a lot of feedback in the beginning. Like the first script I got, you cannot imagine the sound my asshole made. It was like, this is my character, and I was like, they were so sweet to me, but I know they wanted to kill me because I was like, he talks too much, and they're like, okay, well, this is television, and he can't just stand there, but then once I unclenched, it's really flattering though, because we're artistic people, and to have someone take your art and turn it into something artistic that they put their stamp on is really neat. And I think Ramon is, he's not the Will I describe in the book physically, but emotionally, psychologically, all those things that really matter to the character, he's completely captured. So I'm very happy with that.
Did the physical difference bother you at first?
At first it did, and then I saw this photograph of him, and he is such a profoundly sexy man. I had like this blinded hysteria for a moment. And because they have his hair smoothed down in the show, but he's got the most beautiful curly hair. And you know, I saw him do it, and he's just captivating, and he's so great with the cast. Erica Christensen, she's also going to direct an episode this season, and they just get along really well. And I mean, obviously Betty is the best one there. But yeah, and he doesn't mind being upstaged by her. He's like, that's totally fair. I get it.
And are you getting more involved in other film projects?
I am, yeah. So I adapted The Good Daughter for a limited series. I wrote the scripts, and we're going to be filming that at the beginning of next year. And I'm looking forward to that with a lot of happiness, but also dread, because apparently it's your entire life. And we have these nice little lives where it's just us in our pajamas or whatever writing on our laptops, and now it's going to be hundreds of people asking me, is this the right desk? Is this how this character should dress? Is this what this cat looks like? All these things. And, you know, except for the cat, I'm not really interested in that, but I'm going to have to make those decisions.
So this is the first script you've written?
Yeah, well, I've written 6, so it's a 6 episodes, yeah.
And just in the past few months?
No, I wrote it a couple of years ago, because, you know, these things take such a long time. Like, nothing happens, and then everything happens all at once. And the reason I wrote it is because I wanted to understand why writers make decisions in scripts that are different from books, right? That's the age-old thing. It's like, why did they change the book? And now I understand it, because it's so much easier to tell a story rather than show it. Everything has to be expressed through dialogue. And so I wanted to really get into that and understand it. And so I didn't tell anyone I was writing the first episode. And then I thought, okay, well, this is good. And my agent had asked me if I wanted to do it. And so I wrote the whole series, and then I called my agent and I said, you know, you wanted me to see if I could do this, and so I did. And she said, okay, well, let me set you up with a writer to show you how to do it. And I said, no, I've already written it. And she said, oh, so I've got like a history of really screwing with agents here. And the woman Bruna Papandrea, who did Pieces of Her, she read them and she liked them, and you know, we went through all that process, and Peacock bought it, and we're going to be filming it, so we'll see. That's
great. And how did you learn how to do this? Did you have a Sherpa? Did you read a book?
Well, so there's software called Final Draft, which I'm sure you're familiar with, because scripts have to be formatted a certain way. And you know, it's kind of funny because we're used to these 400 or 500 page documents, right? And a script, the margins are like that big on either side. And you know, you hear TV writers say, oh, you know, it took me a year to write this 60-page script, and you think, I could have I wrote 2 books, buddy. But you know, it's such a different way of thinking. But the software does all the formatting for you, which makes it easy. And then if I needed to know, like, well, what happened? How do you format it if 2 characters are speaking at the same time? I would just Google it.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, I thought, you know, should I read a book about this, or should I just keep going? And I just decided to keep going.
Was that the right decision?
Well, apparently. I mean, don't tell Peacock that's how I did it, but yeah.
Did you enjoy that?
I did. You know, another reason I did it is I love writing books, but I wanted to see if I could use a different part of my brain, because it is such a very completely different way of storytelling. I think you've figured that out yourself, because you've done both now. And I like that challenge. I mean, that's one thing that I think has made me so prolific in my work, is that every book I want to do something new and interesting to me and see if I can do it. You know, This Is Why We Lied is a locked room mystery. I've never done that before. I've done lots of, historical sorts of things, past, present, sins of the father sort of stuff. So I always try to find a different way to enter into a story, and this was just a really fun and exciting thing to do. Also challenging, right?
Very hard, yeah. What do you find to be the hardest parts of writing novels?
We were talking about this a little bit. It's the demand on your time, because if you do something well, people want you to do more of it. And I think you just have to learn how to say no. But for me, I love writing books. That's my passion. I'm very conscious of the fact that I've spent so many years of my life, like not just writing, but going to places like this and touring around the world and meeting readers. And a lot of readers have been coming to see me from the very first book tour I did. And I always think about the fact that when I was a struggling college student and I saved up my money to buy a hardcover book from my favorite author, if they had just phoned it in, I just felt so angry. Because I thought, why did you do this? Why are you writing if you're clearly not into it? And I spent 4 hours of my life working to be able to buy this book, and I never want anyone to feel that way. I mean, maybe one or two people might not be happy with the book, but they'll never be able to say she didn't give it her all, because that's what my job is.
What are your least favorite parts of the job?
Probably being on airplanes. I think everybody can agree with that. It's just gotten more and more horrific.
Yeah.
It seems really petty to complain about, though, because, I remember when I was a little girl just wanting to be a writer and loving writing. And the idea that I'm doing this is pretty amazing. I know a lot of my teachers are shocked. But one of my first events I did, this woman came up to me, and you get this all the time. People will say, "Do you remember me from high school?" And you think, yeah, there's a reason we don't talk. But this woman, she's like, "Do you remember me from kindergarten?" I was like, "No." And she said, "I remember you because when the teacher asked us what we wanted to do when we grow up, we both are the only people who answered then what we're doing now." Wow. And you are a published author, and I am divorced from a wealthy man. And then I was like, Sheila, I recognize her. Yeah.
That's wonderful. So let's talk about this book.
Okay.
It's a locked room mystery. I mentioned to somebody the other day that the book I was reading, they saw me on my porch, was a locked room mystery, and I got a completely blank look. Not everybody knows what that means. Tell us what that means.
The hell? We should have a test, right? So it's classic Agatha Christie, and it's not really, the book is not really a locked room per se. It's an isolated lodge that you hike into. But there's a road because the staff isn't going to hike into it. And I read a lot of Agatha Christie because she was the really master of the locked room mystery. The classic, there's a manor house and the road is out and the phones don't work and there's this limited number of guests. It's like Clue. And I thought, wow, now that I've written so many books, that seems like a really hard thing to do, and it is. One thing she always did was she had someone die who no one really liked. And so you didn't feel too bad that they were dead. And so I thought, well, I don't want to do that. I want to make a complicated victim who you root for and who sometimes does really stupid things, but you really don't want this bad thing to happen. And I thought, okay, well, Will and Sarah have gotten married. They're on their honeymoon. They go to this lodge. And the hardest thing for me to write was them as being so happy, right? Because they're married and like just forgiving a very stupid thing the other person does. Remember those heydays? And Will is just elated, and that was so hard. I was like, God, somebody's got to get murdered, And so when I was thinking about the plot, I thought, okay, well, I'm just going to start off with a murder so people know, don't worry, there's a murder. It's not a love story. And then you have this happen, and then you shift back in time to when Will and Sarah first arrive at the lodge. And so as a reader, you should be paying attention because this is your cast of suspects, like the guests, the staff, the family that owns the lodge. You know, there are all kinds of clues in there. And that was a lot of fun because I don't really write books like that. I always play fair with the reader, but I usually thread things in along the way. And when you have this one place where everybody is, you can't suddenly have a butler come in, though Christy was really good at that. And I thought, you know, there's so many tropes to this kind of storytelling, like the road is out or the phones aren't working. But when she was writing them, they weren't tropes. They were just like really good writing. And so, yeah, we have a bad storm, but, you know, there's still such a thing as satellite phones, and the road is washed out, but there's still ATVs, and, you know, they have Wi-Fi and that kind of thing. So it was fun modernizing it and trying to figure out ways around that.
I think one of the things that you're better at than anybody is writing a bunch of really dark shit that is still somehow funny sometimes. And I'm always amazed that I find myself laughing in your books because horrible people are doing horrible things to everybody all the time. Like it's just a panoply of horribleness. Is it something that you deliberately do and like plot out, I'm going to lighten things up here for a second?
Absolutely.
Is it part of your outline or what?
It is, and you know, you had asked if I had like established something very early on in Blindsided, and that's true. I do balance it out so there's not like this unrelenting darkness where people just don't want to keep reading, right? So I have to make the characters interesting. You know, what I thought one of the funniest things about this is in the beginning of the book, Will and Sarah are just going on and on about nature and how beautiful it is and how, oh, look at the trees, oh yeah. And then Faith gets there and she's like, why are there so many birds? And I hate nature, and what are these gnats? And she's just very grumpy about it. And that was a lot of fun just to use her as sort of a comic relief, though she is taking the crime very seriously. But you know, just having her in these situations where she's extremely uncomfortable.
Well, it's fantastic. I hope all of you enjoy it.